Welcome, everyone. You are listening to The Last Dinosaur, and I'm your host, Chris Avasano. The Last Dinosaur is the podcast where you can learn about the changing landscape of the maritime space while hearing from those leading the change. Today marks a very special occasion. You are listening to the 100th episode of The Last Dinosaur Podcast, and honestly, there's only one person who can be on this milestone episode, someone who has profoundly influenced myself and the entire maritime podcasting genre, Lena Gothberg. Lena is the host of the Shipping Podcast, and if you are listening to that, you should be, and is a true voice of change in the maritime industry. Having hosted her podcast for nearly a decade, I think we're coming on that occasion for her very soon. Lena's show by far is the longest-running maritime-related podcast. In this episode, we're going to take an exciting look at her podcast, the impact it's made, and the future of podcasting and social media in maritime shipping. Lena, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Christopher, and congratulations on your episode.
Yeah, it is exciting, right? I mean, it's like a whole milestone. You know, I think when you start podcasting, everything you read and know about it, you know, you have to make it, you know, do the first 3 and then keep it up and keep on a regular pace, all the things that have been written about. But I'd really love to hear, and I think one of the most fascinating part is, how did you get started 10 years ago? I mean, joke around now. Don't want to get into American politics, but, you know, everybody's like, oh, even Ted Cruz has a podcast. You know, you could joke around about it. Everybody's got a podcast. You know, when you started, it wasn't even remotely like that. I'd really love to hear how you started with the idea of being a true trailblazer in our industry and kind of in podcasting overall.
Before I do that, I want to share with you that my was a solo episode, so maybe a little bit more boring, I don't know. But then I also had my old logotype and my old photo, so you know what you're up for now. You have to change your logotype and you have to have a new photo take.
Yeah. The logo I'm looking at some different ones. I kind of, you don't want to fall in love with it, but somebody's helping me out with it. But good advice for sure.
Yeah, what inspired me to start with my podcast, I think at the time I was working for an association called the Institute of Shipping Analysis, and that was business intelligence for the shipping industry in the Nordics, I would say. But I didn't get any budget for marketing, so I don't know how they thought that I was going to attract more members without the budget for marketing. But I knew that they were paying for my time, so I started to go and hang out on conferences where the topic was online communication, social media, vloggers, and programmers. There was so many different people I had never met before. And someone started to talk about podcasting. And they told me that podcasting is storytelling. And I thought shipping is storytelling as well. So I asked them, is there a podcast about shipping? And they said, no. Why should there be? Okay, so I went back home, came back a year later, and I said, is there a podcast about shipping? And they said, you better shut up now. Either you do it yourself or just don't ask anymore. So I went home and I signed up for podcasting school for women in the US. We are talking 2015, so it was before everyone knew Teams and Zoom and everything like that. And there were the two women who started podcasting school for women, and I was so lucky to meet them. They are both in podcasting, the Hall of Fame of podcasting now in the US, and I have met them in person. So it was Elsie Escobar, she works at Libsyn, which is an audio hotel, and Jessica Kupferman. And those two ladies started something called She Podcast after this podcasting school for women,
okay,
which is a very, very large Facebook group for women podcasting. I think it's more than 20,000 members now. But this hasn't started when I met them. So 6-week course, and it was me and 19 women from the US or Canada. And everyone was amazed about this Scandinavian woman. What was she doing there in the middle of everything?
Yeah.
But I mean, since you asked me, I went back to my notes at that time. And I saw, I could smile. I mean, the first thing they teach you is if you last more than 3 months, you're okay.
Yeah. I think that's definitely it. And I've seen a ton of podcasts come in, and I keep this little podcast tracker that I just dropped in the beginning. I dropped twice a year, and that was just kind of born out of a little bit of, I had some questions internally, like what other podcasts are there? And I started to do it. This is when I was at Vesson, and they were just kind of curious, like, hey, we know you have this, but what others? And there was a lot of low hanging fruit. But then what I found is I would go back and edit it. I would start to look and not through any fault, but people would just be like a year since they've updated. I'm like, okay, well, I have to get rid of those. And I kept track of them as well. And people would do 8 or 10, and then it would go quiet, or maybe, like you said, a budget issue or something else would come in, and that would be it. It's very difficult to make it to first 3 months, first 10 episodes, first year. And then you're like, I can't stop this. I've been doing this for, and then you become recognized as the shipping podcast lady, or I get recognized as that dinosaur guy, that sort of stuff.
So that is why it's so hard to stop once you reach 10 years. I can tell you that.
And we could get into that in a second, but just going back. So when you're sitting in those classes and online classes, before everybody's used to doing webinars and Zoom and Teams or what have you. And one of the things that they always suggest is to have a vision. Who am I talking to? What am I talking about? And a little bit of a plan. And then those things can change. So when you first started to where you are today in your podcast, has that changed really materially, or do you think you're still on pretty much the same path that you were when you started after taking this class and you were the lone Scandinavian lady in a room full of lady podcasters from North America?
I think I have seen so much, and I have developed, and I have learned so much, and I have met so many interesting people. So in a way, I think it's changed. But every job changed once you get the hang of it and know what you're doing and how you to do it and with whom and so on. But I looked into my notes and I put down that I want to do this, but it's a digital immature audience. But they are positive to my new initiative here to get the invisible industry out there into the digital universe. So that was my goal and my vision. There were no digital outlets. It had started with social media. There were some websites, some digital online maritime outlets. Of course, you have the G Captain and you have Splash 24/7. They were just, Splash were just started a few years before me. I think John had started a long time before that. But you couldn't hear people, you couldn't see people, and especially no women. I'd like to talk more about that, because I really think one of the things that you have really, kind of feature, and I think it's good for the industry, it's good for everybody, is bringing on, a very focused effort. And it's not to the exclusion of men, but it's a very focused effort on women. And you bring them in from a variety of topics to leadership, solo sailors. I think that was a woman that you had, and all those sort of things that touch the maritime space. And you do feature women. And I always argue, it just is a matter, especially as a male, of opening up your I'm going to use an old fashioned term, opening up your Rolodex, opening up your card file and finding different people along the way. And I think LinkedIn and other types of social media actually is positive in that way, because you could find somebody, say, hey, I see you doing this. Would you like to come on a podcast? I'd love to explore that, because I think you're definitely not only a pioneer in the podcasting space, but a pioneer in kind of calling that to attention without being, let's say, just doing it in the right way, I think is the proper way of saying it. Thank you. Thank you for sort of acknowledging that, because some people think it's a little bit too feminist to be sort of talking about the females need their voice, but I don't think so. I think I would rather talk to men who are of the same opinion that you are. We need the women as well. I look at it from a really practical point of view. I have 3 kids. I have 2 daughters. So I look at this from a really, I've enjoyed my time in the maritime space. And I'm not saying my kids, I don't think they want anything to do. The closest one is I have a daughter that goes to school, coastal New Jersey, and she can see ships coming up the coast. So when she's at the beach, she'll take pictures. Dad, look at this ship. So okay. So she
I raised her right. Everybody jokes around. But like, I want my children, the friends of my children, to be able to be in this industry and to be heard and to be highlighted. There are a lot of people and women and people from different areas that are doing some great things in our industry, some exceptional things. And it's great to highlight it, and I think it's not a feminism or woke. It's just, open up your Rolodex a little bit more. You'll find a whole interesting world.
Nowadays, I don't even think about if it's a male or a female guest. I just want to hear their story. I want to listen to them. And then I think if I want to listen to them, other people want to listen to them as well. And if they don't want to, they can just skip that episode. The only ones listening to every episode is me and my editor.
I'm the only one. And I had a former colleague, and he's like, and I was surprised. This guy is very well educated. He's a senior C-suite level at a company. I won't call him out. But he's like, when you have this stuff on the ports, I don't listen to it. Okay. He goes, I like this stuff. I don't like this stuff. I'm like, that's cool. But then I have other people say, I like the port stuff. I think it's important. The ports and digitalization and decarbon. But he's like, port stuff, I can live without. Like, okay.
I think he is doing a mistake. I can say that he's doing a mistake because usually what you think you're going to hear is not what you're going to hear. I mean, I have so many favorite shows that I listen to, and I think, I want to listen to that one. And then I think, but the ones I didn't even think about listening to, they were the best. They were the best.
Yeah, he could be, but hey man, but the one thing that I think it goes to what you're saying is that if you put something out there, it's not going to be for everybody. It's not necessarily for everybody. But what you're trying to do, and I think what I'm trying to do, is just to bring the story about what they're doing. And I focus more on the digital side and the digital transformation. And the other part of that, we could talk about this in a second, is that, and this is where I've changed actually, where I focused on the digital stuff. Okay, I want people who build digital solutions and things like that. But I've started to broaden it in social media impacts, because that is part of the digitalization. I think you're an embodiment of that. Nobody even saw this stuff 7 years ago. Then COVID, people started to listen to podcasts because they wanted to hear another voice, and then it's kind of gotten bigger. And then the other part is the link between decarbonization, digitalization, but the social media aspect and using this form of social media to expand and to get newer voices. I think you've done great. And was that part of your initial going in proposition that this is what you wanted to do?
Yeah. I mean, I started hanging out with people with online communication. So I started to learn how to strategize on that side of things as well. I was working in the marine insurance industry before. I studied law, and then I started marine insurance. And after that, I had business intelligence and all of that. And then I thought, how do we get out of our own bubble? How do we reach people outside our own industry? Because, I mean, the maritime newspapers, or whatever we should call them nowadays, news, they are for us in the industry.
Right.
No one else listens to them or subscribe to them or pay a lot of money to get the news from our industry.
Right.
So
they're very good at what they do. I just took a recent class about writing, and it said, you have to know your audience. They know their audience. They know it's the ship owners, the marine manufacturer. They know exactly who they're at. They do a wonderful job, whether it's Lloyd's or John and G Captain or Tradewinds, my friend Holly. They all do great jobs. And but you drop that in front of, my buddy who's a lawyer, you're like, oh, that's nice.
Yeah. No, but I mean, I want to reach outside our bubble, and that has to do with recruitment and the profile of our industry. I was so fed up explaining to my friends what I do. They always asked me, you are on a flight now again. Where are you going and why? And it's my job. Okay. Yeah, but what do you do? And everyone was asking the same thing. So I felt I need to, listen to my podcast if you want to hear me.
Right. Yeah. But I have found that people who approach me, and they'll send me a LinkedIn message, a lot of them aren't industry insiders. But in fact, they are people who are looking to get into the industry. As a matter of fact, I had somebody who, my previous company, say during their vetting process and coming on board and getting hired, they listened to my podcast to kind of get a flavor of the industry, what was going on, and just to understand a little bit more about it. And I found that through a few people who were saying, I'm new to the industry. I don't know much, but your podcast gives it in a nice chunk that is relatable. It's not full with technical jargon. And we'll maybe talk about, MEPC and sometimes I'll take a little side note and say, okay, let's explain what that is just in case there's, somebody not familiar. But certainly that's one of the things, because I think we have that problem of sea blindness. I think that's a huge part of the issue.
I have both. I have people who doesn't know anything. I sent out a question. Sent out to people to say, maybe I will stop this now. I've been doing it for 10 years. And I got so many messages back from people to say, you have to continue. Or I got emails and messages on LinkedIn as well to say, when I was new in this industry, I had no idea what to expect. Or people who say, I wanted to change my career and I started to listen to you and I felt I want to change into this branch of our industry instead. And also I get messages from teachers at maritime universities, especially in the US, saying to me, you need to continue.
Yeah.
I tell my students they need to listen to your podcast. At one time I had an email saying, I got a class full of students who wants to become master mariners. And now they say, why should we become master mariners when everything is going to be, autonomous shipping anyway? And then she said to them, go and listen to Lena's podcast and then you know what you can become when you grow up, more or less. Yeah. So now I have a responsibility.
It's funny. I was a part of the Connecticut Maritime Association. I was past president. And then, sometimes they invite you to be part of the Connecticut Maritime Association. They have an education foundation where they do outreach to not only the maritime schools, like where I went, or other fantastic schools, but also there's some high schools. And there's one here. And, I was talking to the woman that was coordinating this with, and she said, can you come to the session? I haven't been able to make it work. I've been traveling. I said, yeah. She goes, you could talk about what you do, but you can also talk about your podcast. And then, because I think that's kind of how kids communicate and consume information, whether it's to go to sea, go to maritime, or even just understand what's going on. I think part of the problem is the sea blindness, that people don't understand where they get their, for lack of a better term, stuff from, whether it's oil in the car or gas in the car or the shirt that I'm wearing or what have you. People just don't understand that. I think that is part of the responsibility. And one of the reasons why I started the podcast was like, hey, there's a big giant world out here with a lot of interesting stories. Start getting them out there. And then I realized what you were doing, like, well, I just don't want to do like sea stories. So that's why I focused. That's why I was like, well, we just doing that. And they got there's a lot of other news and type of information ones. Lloyd's List does a great one. Trade Ones that has a couple now. There's a few others that I'm missing. ABS has a good one. But I wanted to focus on the digital side. But, you can still tell your stories there.
Yeah. Talking about digital, I am a digital nerd as well, as you might have noticed. I tried to talk to those people as well, but when I started, no one knew how to listen to a podcast. We go back so long. It's almost 10 years since I started. I cannot tell you how many mobile phones I have had in my hand showing this is an app. And this is what you press, and then you just start listening. And when I did my website, which I haven't had time to remake, I decided to make the biggest play button there is, because I had old mails who said, I don't know how to listen. And I said, go to shippingpodcast.com and press play, and you will know.
I stole something from you, and I'll tell you what it is. And I'm shameless, but I took your idea from your website, said how to download and I basically reworked that into a PowerPoint presentation that I put as a carousel on a LinkedIn post like 3 months ago. It hasn't moved the needle too much, but maybe it does a little bit. But a handful of people, I'm like sitting at a table, like, do you like your podcast? I go, how do I listen? I go, give me your phone. I go, you don't mind, dude? No.
Then you subscribe for them.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I 5-star review and subscribe. Absolutely. I have 25-star reviews. And like half of them are me sitting at some sort of dinner. And I try to beg my kids to do the same thing. Hey, could you throw your pop and a little bit of a bone here, guys? How about a 5-star review? But no, that is definitely one of the convergences of our industry, is that as people in senior leadership, a little older, going to start to retire, you're getting kind of my generation, which is Generation X, and the millennials starting to lead. And we were definitely not digital natives because we kind of grew up a little bit, more analog, but we had to adapt. And then obviously the generations behind us are more native, but certainly that willingness to consume media like this and to have stories told like this is a positive thing for what you do.
It has been a journey, I can tell you that.
Right.
Going back to the female voices, I mean, when I started my podcast and I realized, wow, I can do this. Wow, I can reach the world from my kitchen table. I can do this. And then I started to think maybe I should do some good with that more than just starting the podcast. So I decided early on that I wanted to have 50-50 men and women on my podcast. It took me 5 years.
I'm at 30-70 and women to men. And I try to eke that number up every year. I ended up moving above 30 before I was below 30. But it's not for a lack of trying. It's not for anything else, but just to get engagement and to get people to feel comfortable.
Yeah, I think it's easier now. I mean, previously it was only men who used to talk and be, also on conferences and presentations and whatever. So there were not so many women that were used to doing that. I have one advantage. I have been a very active member of VISTA, Women's International Shipping and Trading Association.
I'm a Mister here in Connecticut, so there you go.
Good for you.
And I featured a bunch of WISTA folks. I had a period where I featured 3 or 4 WISTA board members in a very short order. It kind of comes in spurts, but yeah, I don't know. Very familiar.
I was a member from the year 2000 in Sweden. And then I was the president of VISTA in Sweden in 2004 to 2008, which meant you want to, but you have to go on the annual general meeting and meet all the other women from every other national VISTA association. And then I started building my network there. One of my very best friends I met in the Netherlands, the first time I went to Rotterdam for a VISTA conference, and that is Karin Olsel, now a big ship owner and chair of the European Ship Owners Association. We met, and she wasn't even a member of VISTA at that time. And then, I think I have attended 15 AGMs around the world.
Wow, good for you.
And I love doing that. It's a special atmosphere and a very energetic audience then. I was part of the organizing committee when we held it in Stockholm in 2011, and that was great as well. Yeah. So I think I have met so many women, but in the beginning I had to persuade them to be on my podcast because they didn't know what a podcast was either. And they didn't know, what should I talk about? Yeah, talk about yourself. That's a good start.
Yeah, that's a great start. And I know I've had some folks, not necessarily women, men, well, not sure. And then finally they start to come around. I think part of being a longevity, you have this thing this is a legitimate tool. This is not Chris or Lena trying to sell you something or trying to political or other point of view, but it's just tell your story. And then you see people, I don't know if you have this problem, but I have a very, as a former colleague of mine used to say, a very positive problem. I have people lined up now, well until the end of this year into early next year that I have to start to juggle. And I get a lot of people who approach me directly or sometimes through PR firms and say, does this make sense? What do you think? I'll sometimes say, okay, well, that's okay. And this is maybe not, or this is a very good one. But I do think it's a positive problem because it shows that people are adapting to this and using podcasts as a tool to get publicity, which is fine, and to talk about themselves, which is fine, talk about their products or how they view things. That's okay as well. And I just think it's definitely, I'm on that other part of the evolution. did in the beginning have to put a list of friends of Chris that would come on the podcast, and I found 2 of which were women, actually. So Carleen Leiden Walker, who's always, she's fantastic. And then Cynthia Hudson of Hudson Marine in Philadelphia. She came on.
I have had them both.
Yeah, they were on my early days. So
I met
it was
Cynthia when I was in Philadelphia for Podcast Movement. So my first Podcast Movement conference was great.
Okay.
That was held in Philadelphia.
Okay.
4,000 people podcasting, meeting in a hotel. I was amazed. And they were looking at me, oh, it's a woman.
Yeah.
Out of these 4,000 people, if there were 20 women, I don't know. So it's the same. It's completely the same thing as in shipping. When I started in shipping, there were no women but me.
Wow.
Yeah, they are working with the same issues as we are.
That's fantastic. Now you've hinted about this, and you talked about this. I didn't have a chance to listen to your latest podcast, but a little bit. I'll put it to you this way: it was a little bit of a crossroads. Your big crossroads is 10 years, which is I'm coming up on my 3rd anniversary, so I have a long ways to go. You talk about a little bit of a crossroads, and maybe figuring out continuing a certain way. Any sort of direction you'd like to share, or maybe reiterate what you've come to the conclusion, or share with us here?
I think that the podcasting industry is changing after 10 years. I can see that. I mean, if you start a podcast today, it's much easier, and you don't need to have that knowledge that I have gained about everything in the background. And you just, it's so easy to start a podcast.
Ridiculously easy, yeah.
Yes, it is. And you don't even have to edit it if you don't want to. Depends on your audience, whatever they want to listen to. But the thing that everyone is telling me now is that it's not enough with audio. You have to have the video as well, because that is the trend.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if I want to do that. I mean, why should I let people watch me when I'm working?
It's so weird. And again, not, looking at the success. Someone said, oh, you should do like a 2-hour podcast like Joe Rogan. I said, listen, man, you want to pay me $20 million a year? Sure. I'll get, Lena and I'll split it with you. 10 million each US. We'll talk about shipping stuff. We'll have a guest on.
Yep.
No problem.
We will have 24/7. No problem.
Yeah. I could yap about shipping all day. And I think we share that in common. But yeah, I've been playing with that. If you guys have seen a little bit, some video clips, focusing mainly on audio, because I've had people tell me they listen to my podcast when they're walking the dog or doing the dishes. It's interesting to hear, or working out. I'm like, oh, you listen to me, but I'm really, hopefully I motivate you, because I'm tired. I'm sorry. Yeah. But it's interesting. And I think that, so continuing or not continuing, what do you think you're going to end up doing there? Or just maybe a little bit of change.
Well, the anniversary is not until the 1st of August, so I have time to think about that.
Okay. So
but I think I'm a radio person from the beginning. When I was a small child, I listened to radio. And I think that is why I think audio is enough. But that's my point of view, and maybe not my audience. On the other hand, I have received emails when they say, do it your way. It's your way. We want to listen to you. So just continue. We don't care if there is a video or not.
Right.
On the other hand, I mean, I took 2 months out. I've been doing podcasting episodes every other Friday since 2015. And now I just couldn't do it because I just almost hit the wall in October. I ended up in a very toxic environment working in a project. So I was fed up with everything. So I didn't do anything for 2 months. And at the beginning, I felt like, oh, this is nice. I don't have to produce a podcast. But now I think that I can't live without it. I have to continue.
It's an interesting sort of dynamic, and something that I've kind of, I slowed down at one point. I started a new job in November, interestingly. So I had a bunch, and then I started a new job. I ended up traveling, some stuff at home, just kind of things going on, nothing bad. And I was like, oh, wow, I haven't done one in a long time. You get that itch back. You're like, well, I kind of like doing this. I like doing my own little thing. I like the creative part. I read an interesting book called something like The Creative Act by Rick Rubin. who's a record producer. He's produced everything from like the Beastie Boys to all sorts of acts. And he talks about the creative act and talks about, when you do things, you have to do it for yourself, right? You don't do it for the audience per se. And that gets back to like selecting guests. You do it for yourself. You're like, I think that person will be interesting. I think that they will be interesting because of this. And I want to hear it. And if everybody doesn't listen to it, well, that's okay. And if everybody does listen to it, that's great too. So I think that that's one of the things that I know I kind of think about for sure.
And then, it's a hobby. But people sometimes expect you to do something more and whatever. It takes a lot of time and it takes a bit of money to do it.
It does.
Out of pocket expenses.
It does. That's why I have my buy me a coffee thing. Come on, guys. And I don't expect a lot. I'm not doing Patreon or anything else. Part of me can't be bothered, but it's like people don't realize you have to pay for a service. You have to pay for this, editor, or I don't do it, I do it myself, but you pay for service or various different things. It adds up, on their own. They're not necessarily expensive, but, it does add up over time.
I don't want to pay, I don't want people to pay to listen.
No.
Because that's the entire idea, that it should be free.
Right. I've used, like I said, the buy me a coffee, which is kind of like a tip jar. You want to find, but great. And I put that in, and I know some people have. But yeah, like the idea of Patreon or behind a firewall, it's no desire to do.
I do have a Patreon account, but I don't put anything behind a firewall.
Right.
So I have some people who are just paying, and I think that they might be tipping me, like your coffee.
Yeah, that's exactly how I view it. Looking back over on your greater career in the maritime space, you talk about your communications with college students and other. What would you tell them about getting into our industry? Not necessarily the industry of podcasting. I guess that's our industry as well, which maybe I've thought about going to one of these podcasting events just to check it out. I've never been, but in the shipping space, what would you tell people today in getting in shipping, and why would you encourage them to do that?
The same thing I have always told them. If you want to get into an industry which is global, exciting, things are happening, you'll never have a dull moment, you have to start working in the maritime industry.
Yeah.
I think I share that passion with everyone else, at least all my guests, all my 250 guests have told me the same thing.
You're big, 250. I know, that's amazing. Yeah, I basically say the same thing. I tell people, look, at the end of the day, it's the largest contributor in the world to the economy. And then the other part that I like, and you think about it, if you think about the number of people who are in shipping jobs overall, and then you look at the impact to the economy, it gives you an opportunity to make an impact, especially with decarbonization, right? I'm just picking one part, to make an impact that has a significant impact on that global economy. So if you do something really well, efficiencies and reduction, you can have an impact at a very, very high level beyond your town or your state or your country or whatever it is. And that's what always is kind of great. Plus, you get to meet a lot of cool people. And if you're lucky, you get to go travel and eat great foods and meet great people in person. And speaking of travel, one question for you that I always end up with, and this is my little thing here. You mentioned travel. I'm not sure if you've been traveling much lately, but when you do travel, or maybe just on your nightstand or before you go to bed, what are you reading these days? Anything interesting?
I haven't read since I started my podcast in 2015. I don't read anymore. I listen to so many podcasts. When I go to bed, I put on a podcast and I listen, and then I put it on so it stops after 15 minutes or 30 minutes, so I can...
So what are you listening now? What are your podcasts?
You don't want to hear that, because I'm listening to a daily podcast about American politics.
Okay. All right. Okay.
I learned that your election was the podcasting election this time, 2024.
It was the podcasting election. I actually started not podcasting. I do listen to some podcasts. I listen to a couple, about news related. I listen to more like novel type podcasts, like a serial type podcast, storytelling and things like that. But I started in the gym actually the other day listening to my first audiobook, which was because audible.com. So I subscribe to Amazon to listen to music, and they said you get one Audible audiobook listen per month with your subscription. So I'm like sitting there in the gym. I'm like, I don't feel like listening to music. Look at a podcast. I'm like, I don't listen to like audiobooks. So I'm listening to a book, which I think will help me. It's called Super Communicators, about how it's about like the whole idea of listening and interacting and empathy. And I've gotten about 50 minutes into it's a 7-hour book. So if I do a couple more workouts by the end of the month, I should be in good shape. But that's the first time I've ever done that, because I do like to read. But I've been doing this, and I'm like, oh, that's kind of cool. Listen to it for a while. And it's written by the author, wrote a book about habits, I think, forming habits and stuff. So this one's called Super Communicator. Very good. I always try to, that's the one thing that I've learned podcasting. And I don't know if you're the same, you mentioned it. I always try to learn about doing my podcasting better, whether it's the marketing point, whether it's the interview part. I've been trying on that journey of learning really for the last 3 years.
Since I started podcasting school for women, I've continued to work with those women and doing coaching classes and things like that.
That's amazing.
Yeah, every other year or something like that.
That is amazing. That is so. That's really that's a true testament to your longevity and your commitment to it. Lena, we could probably talk about shipping and podcasting for 7 hours. If anybody's listening, they want to do a Joe Rogan type podcast with two people, you could be the headline. There could be the Lena Show with Chris. No problem. No problem at all. If somebody really wants to see that for 2 hours a day or every other day for forever on video. But all kidding aside, it was an honor to have you on. Thank you so much for sharing kind of how you got it started and kind of your motivations. And I look forward to, if you want, 10 more years, if you want to do it.
My God, I was old when I started. I'm getting older every day now.
No, you don't look it though. You got that. It must be that Swedish lifestyle. Very relaxed. Yeah.
Thank you for having me, Chris, and best of luck moving forward. And if there is anything you need help with, just let me know.
I will. Thank you so much, Lena.